So good morning, universe. So time check, it's 6:35 in the morning, and I just woke up early. Talaga, it's early for me. And 6:35 since I woke up late. I woke up late. I didn't know how to use wake up, woke up. Please don't judge me. I'm just a person who commit mistakes. Yeah.
Oh my God! Wow!
But before we'll be filming. So, isa ni mag-himo sa mong mag-perform, mag-unsa pa, mag-tsagan-tsagan. Ligo sa taon ko ninyo guys, kay mura mag-hagar na kay ko, alam na ginang kuan lagi pagmata nga. Gusto ko na kung fresh or what? Or kanang energetic ay yun ko mag-ligo mo, medyo nabiya, manigon sa energy. For energy, hindi mo anak. Ito kayo, so be right back. Please hold your breath, kay pagbalik ko, bis nagtagalog ako eh. Pagbalik na ako, makita niya ang anong to, medyo yes. At watch yung nakita yung gusto ko kalibutan. So, be right back.
Meanwhile,
a few inches later.
So, welcome back guys. Man ako naligo. Yeah. So, man niya ako na ako magligo. So, it's very fresh.
paano masabi?
Pero, honestly, daghang kong bukas. So, don't expect too much. So, di pa ni mga akong outfit ha. Di ko maghubo. Maghubo mo ko. Wala naman pamangkas ang outfit sa among subject. So, just wait and I will be back. So guys, this is my pamalakasang outfit for today. So we were going to title our vlog with A Day with Anatomical Movement.
Ang susunod na programa ay Rated G. Ito ay pwede sa lahat ng manonood.
Good morning universe and hello world. I am back. So for today's video, we will going to discuss the different types of anatomical movement. But before that, you may just sit back, relax, and enjoy. Because after this short break, we will be having our full discussion about our topic.
Sa classroom may batas. Bawal lumabas o bawal lumabas.
So bawal ngang lumabas. I am back guys. So we have here the first year college BPED student from Eastern Visayas State University, Ormo Campus. And he is Mr. Joyos Cortez Herrera. A round of applause please. So let's define first what is anatomical movement. So anatomical movement is an act or instance of moving the bodily structures or as the change of position in one or more of the joint of the body. So did you know that most movement have an opposite movement called antagonistic movement?
So next, we'll now go into the different types of anatomical movement.
First is the abduction. So abduction is the movement away from the midline. So it moves the arm laterally away from the body. And here is an example of abduction. Next is the adduction. So adduction is the movement of the body part towards the body's midline. So if a person has their arm straight out at the shoulder and brings them down to their side, it is adduction. So here is an example of adduction. So the muscles involved are the trapezius, the latissimus dorsal, pectoralis major, deltoid, biceps and triceps. Then the bones involved are the scapula, the clavicle, and the humerus. Next is the angular motion. So angular motion is the motion of the body about a fixed axis or fixed point. it is equal to the angle passed over at the point or axis by line thrown to the body. So here is an example of the angular motion. So next is the circumduction. So circumduction is the movement of the body regions in a circular manner, in which the end of the body region being moved stays relatively stationary while the other end describes a circle. So here is an example of a circumduction. So the muscles involved are the trapezius, the latissimus dorsal, pectoralis major, deltoid, biceps and triceps. Then the bones involved are the scapula, the clavicle, and the humerus. So next is the dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. So these are the movements at ankle joint or foot, which is a hinge foot. So first is the dorsiflexion. So dorsiflexions are the movements of the foot upward. So in dorsiflexion, the foot is closer to the chin. So here is an example of a dorsiflexion. So the next is the opposite of the dorsiflexion, which is the plantar flexion. So plantar flexions are the movement of foot downward. So it is used when you point your toes. So here is an example of a plantar flexion. So the muscles involved are the peroneus longus, the extensor digitorum, the tibialis anterior, the gastrocnemius, the Achilles tendon, and the sartorius. The bones involved are the patella, the tibia, the fibula, the tarsal, metatarsals, and the phalanges of toes. Next is the elevation and depression. So elevation and depression, of course, when the structure moves in superior or inferior direction. So first is the elevation. So elevation refers to the movement in a superior direction. So here is an example of an elevation. So next is the opposite of elevation, which is the depression. So depression refers to the movement in inferior direction. So here is an example of a depression. So the muscles involved are the trapezius muscle, the latissimus dorsal muscle, the shoulder muscle, the deltoid muscle, the pectoralis major muscle, and the sternocleidomastoid muscle. Then bones involved are the clavicle and the scapula. Next is the extension and flexion. So first is the extension. So extension occurs with the same plane as flexion, except that it increases the angle between articulating elements. So example of a extension is extending the arm both sides, and here it is. Next is the opposite of extension, which is flexion. So flexion is the movement in the anterior and posterior plane that it reduces the angle between articulating elements. So example of flexion is bringing the hand towards the chest, that is flexing the joints of the arm. So here is an example of the flexion. So the muscles involved are the extensor and flexor group, biceps and triceps. Then the bones involved are the humerus, videus, and ulna. So next is gliding. Gliding occurs when two opposing surfaces slide past each other, as between the articulating carpals and tarsals, and as between the clavicle. When you're performing this movement, you transfer the weight to the other side without changing the foot position. So here is an example of a gliding. So the bones involved are the external oblique down to the lower body. The bones involved are the lumbar vertebra down to the phalanges of toes. So next is the opposition. So opposition is the special movement of a thumb which enables us to grasp or hold an object. So here is an example of an opposition. So next is the opposite of opposition, which is the reposition. So repositions the movement that moves the thumb and the little finger away from each other, effectively reversing opposition. And here is an example of a reposition. So the muscles involved are the extensor and flexor group. The bones involved are the metacarpals and the phalanges of fingers. Next is the pronation and supination. So pronation and supination refers to the rotation of the end of the radius across the anterior surface of the ulna. So first is the supination. So supination, this rotation moves the hand and the wrist from palm facing front. So here is an example of a supination. So next is the opposite of supination, which is the pronation. So this rotation moves the wrist and the hand from palm facing down. So here is an example of a pronation. The muscles involved are the biceps and triceps, the extensor and flexor group. Then the bones involved are the humerus, the radius, and the ulna. Next is the protraction and retraction. So first is the protraction. So protraction is the moving part of the body anteriorly in horizontal plane, is inducing the face forward to gain distance at the finish line. So here is an example of protraction. So next is the retraction. So retraction is the reverse movement of protraction, as in pulling the jaw back towards the spine. So here is an example of retraction. The muscles involved are the trapezius, the sternocleidomastoid, the zygomatic, the orbicularis, the masseter, and the occipitalis. Then the bones involved are the lower mandible, the zygomatic, the occipital, and the maxilla. So lastly is the rotation. So rotation involves turning the body or limb around the longitudinal axis, as in rotating the arm to screw in a light bulb. So here is an example of a rotation. The muscles involved are the gluteus maximus, the gluteus medius, and pectineus. The bones involved are the pelvic, sacrum, coccyx, femur, and lumbar vertebra. So that's it guys. So I hope you've learned a lot from this video, and please do subscribe on my YouTube channel. Keep safe and God bless us all. Bye bye.
So guys, nahuman na jud ko. Oh. Mana ko. So makatugis ko sayo di ako takdag mga bugas-bugas kay na stress ko oy. Pero di sa ko anhan stress ko kay wa ko na ay why. So guys. What? So ako din mama, gapa kayo.
Hangtod sa gayon, magkita-kita ra ta po. Bye bye.